Good afternoon, everyone. We'll give just another minute for people to log in and then we'll get started. All right, we're going to go ahead and jump in and get started with our webinar today. Thank you for taking some time to spend with us. I'm Amanda Hackett. I'm on the CWR Board of Directors and I'm co-chair of the Education Committee. Just a few housekeeping items. This webinar is in webinar format on Zoom, so you'll see the speaker. It won't be a grid of faces like you might be used to in normal Zoom calls. Please use the Q&A and chat features to ask questions. We'll be monitoring that throughout, and there'll be time at the end for questions. If we get to the end of our hour together and you still have some unanswered questions, our presenter, Carole, is very happy to talk with you about your personal situations with publishing and very happy to be a resource for you. And there will be a survey and some additional resources that go out after the webinar. It's also being recorded and that'll be sent out after the webinar. So I just wanted to start with saying, for those of you from ACWR and anyone who's new, Communicators for Women Religious is a group of people that serve as voices for our congregation. So many of our members are in communicator or marketing type roles, but we've also expanded in recent years for anyone who serves as a voice for their congregation. So some of us are like justice promoters, development professionals, vocations directors, and the like. I also want to give ACWR a chance to introduce themselves. So Lisa, you can go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. Hello, everybody. My name is Lisa Schell, and I'm the Congregation Archivist for the Adrian Dominican Sisters in Michigan and the current past president of ACWR. I am pleased to be joining all of you as a representative, and I am a CWR enthusiast and partner, and so happy to be here. Just a few words about ACWR. We were officially incorporated in '93. We represent more than 135 religious communities. And our current membership is right around 200 members. We promote professional development. We offer supportive services for archivists, leaders, and allies. We offer networking opportunities for both lay and sisters. And of course, researchers and scholars and people interested in these collections are also people that we are constantly trying to reach out to create more visibility and accessibility to our collections. We offer free webinars as well. And so we're so happy to be here in our second co-creator shared webinar with CWR. And we have an active listserv, an engaging mentoring program, robust educational resources, and an informative newsletter. And we also offer consultant support services for women religious archives. We're pioneering, along with communicators, new ways to preserve these stories and transform charism into perpetuity. So thank you so much for allowing us to join you this afternoon.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carole Sargent, who is our presenter today. So Carole, you can take it away.
Thank you. And this is a lot of fun because I've decided to dedicate the next 10 years, although every year I keep saying the next 10 years, to working with Catholic sisters on their stories. I live across the street from a monastery of sisters, the Monastery of the Visitation in Georgetown. And it was through those sisters that I really got introduced to the world of Catholic sisters, but they were cloistered, and it's a really different life in a monastery. I lived with some of the religious of the Sacred Heart for 2.5 years in an experimental peace community in Washington, D.C., and that was a completely different experience with sisters who are not only not habited, but also, you know, I think there's a pretty big political spectrum among sisters, and I got to experience different kinds of lives and communities. And I have my friends, Sister Jeanne Clark and Tim Casey with me, and they're going to be talking about how we worked together as a group to work on a book that Sister Jeanne did. It's right behind me all the way in. We're going to be showing you a little more about that. So to get started, let me go ahead and share the screen. And this, I've given you my contact information because I really hope you'll feel free to contact me and reach out and actually have me work with you on any publishing issues that you may have. I'm the director of the Office of Scholarly Publications. I founded it 18 years ago at Georgetown University, where I've worked for 27 years this month. I can't believe we've racked that up, but we have. But 18 years ago, I decided that we needed to have an office to focus on publishing for faculty. And fortunately, our then provost agreed, and we began in 2006. And let's see. There's a challenge to overcome, though, when we're working with Catholic sisters. It's very different than my work with faculty. Faculty know that they need to publish. This is part of the career they entered. They walked in understanding that it was an outcome they needed, and I work with them on research publication for tenure and promotion. Catholic sisters have no such assumption, and in fact, often, if not most of the time, certainly not always, but often, there's a challenge to overcome in that many of them are dubious about any spotlight. That's really not why they entered their congregation. That's really was not typically a piece of their vocation. And so working with Catholic sisters isn't like, okay, you know, sister, we've got a 10-step plan here. Come on, we're going to do a book. Come on, we're going to do an article. What you'll really usually have, not always again, but often, is a sister putting on the brakes. And I was used to that before we got into this. I had spoken with a lot of sisters about public intellectual engagement. Sometimes they love it and do get into it. So I really don't want to give anyone one size fits all assumptions here, but sometimes there can be challenges. Now, one way out of this, we have a couple of ways. I'm going to show you from practical examples, a couple of ways that we got through this. But one of them is how Sister Jeanne did it for herself, what she thought of when we started working together. When we met in 2017, I want to say, when she came to Washington, D.C. for a Thomas Berry conference. And Father Thomas Berry was an ecogeologian who, had this very transformative vision of the earth and the universe. And she was here for a conference with Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, her good friends. So I'll let Sister Jeanne take it from there.
Yeah, well, I never intended to write a book. Matter of fact, I've never thought of myself as a writer. Though when I look back, I was writing a lot of poetry, and I did a lot of journal writing, actually. And so I did have these things on little scraps of paper all around in different files. But when I met Carole Sargent, I would first say there would be no book without her. I really believe that. But it was not that we planned it together. It happened in the course of our lives. It was our experience. We met each other at Georgetown in that conference. And because I just saw a little picture on a bookshelf of Anne Montgomery, who I knew, I said, "Oh, you know Anne Montgomery." And then I just started telling a story about Anne and myself. She was resisting the Trident submarine in Connecticut, and I had resisted the Trident submarine in Washington State at Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action.
It's just a picture of her.
And so Carole asked me the next morning, if I would be comfortable if she recorded that story, a story that I had told that night, and she did. And that was the beginning of the book. Little did we know that that was going to be the book.
Yeah.
But that was, it happened in a process, which I think did interfere with the process. But if we're just open to our experience and our relationships with each other, something emerges. So that's how this book did. And I noticed, Lisa, that you're from the Adrian Dominicans. I'm an Amityville Dominican, a Dominican sister from Amityville, New York. And I was saying to Carole recently that in a way, publishing a book is like preaching. You know, it's having your voice heard, but it's not just your voice. When you're preaching, it's not just your voice that people are listening to. They're listening to a whole process out. It could be scripture. It could be about the earth. And so this was a way for my voice to be heard. And I did have a lot to say, because my story contained so much experience. So as we met in the beginning, Carole and I just met I think it was almost every week, as I remember it. I don't know. And I would just tell one story after another, and she would record them. But then I began to learn about her life and what she was visioning for herself and her house and her community. She was too about creating a community, and based in prayer and academic writing or reflection. And so we began to relate to each other. And this book then came out of not just my thoughts and my story, but it included Carole's vision. Not that I wrote about that, but it did influence that. And then later, Tim joined the group, and I began to learn all about his life, a great person of meditation. And he even got married during our time talking. And so what I'm trying to say is this book emerged out of relationship, which is how everything happens in the universe. You see, a very big part of my book, it is the story of, my activism, my anti-nuclear work. There are stories in there about my time in jail. And many stories about the organic farm that I founded and the children that I worked with there. And so the book is filled with wonderful stories. But it's also, it's incomplete process of the universe story. And that's what I'm asking people in the book when they read it. I say in the introduction, as you read this, don't just think of my story, but I hope it will lead you to thinking about your story. And then, of course, how we're all writing evolving, our little stories are all evolving together into the great story of the universe. So it's all about storytelling. And it is an amazing thing that the book emerged. I asked Carole at different points, who's going to read this book? Well, maybe some of my family or peace people. And she said to me, don't think of the audience, just keep writing. It has been amazing to me how that book has been received. First of all, that it got published by Orbis, which for me was like a miracle, and it happened again, in relationship. And then all the feedback that I'm getting from people who are reading it and are connecting their story. And especially, we all need to connect to the story of the universe. That is the most important thing for us to be doing today in this world. And because if we don't do it, and we don't act on it, we might go extinct as human beings. And so I'm just so grateful for Tim and Carole and the whole process of and that my voice can be heard through this book, and that the voice of the universe can be heard. Because when we put things into words and publish them, we never know where it's going. So thank you to Carole and Tim and to the whole process.
That was perfect. And as we go to Tim, I'll let him tell the little PS to all of this.
Yeah, so I get the great honor of sharing some good news we heard last week, and that is that Jeanne's book received a gold medal award, a Nautilus Book Award, on the topic of spiritual memoir. But I think, you know, one of the key things I want to talk about is how we didn't aim to write a book that would win an award. My professional background and title is producer, but I often say I'm not trying to produce, I'm trying to listen. The first step is listening. And so the way this started was, as Jeanne mentioned, Carole and Jeanne were meeting on a weekly basis. And then during the pandemic, you know, I was speaking with Carole, and she said she was meeting with Sister Jeanne. And I said, you know, could we maybe do a kind of mutual spiritual direction during that time via Zoom, and just meet and talk about our lives and what we were working on. And that's how it started. It was just kind of this spiritual group convening by Zoom of the three of us. And as we started to meet, and I started to learn more about Jeanne's life, one of the jokes we often say is we just started to let Jeanne speak. We wanted to just hear more and more about Jeanne. And initially we were talking about taking the some of the stories she told at the farm and turning them into animations, because she has this great Irish storytelling way of telling these little vignettes that just are universal. And so it was, I think, Carole who said, well, you know, using the technology of Zoom, why don't we just start recording it? And then maybe we can, you know, go and transcribe it from Zoom. And so we started with those stories. And as we were going through hearing those stories, we started to hear, you know, stories about incarceration and nuclear weapons. And we said, well, this isn't really a children's story. But we wanted to hear more. And so we said, well, why don't you just talk about those? And we transcribed that. And then from that transcription, Jeanne then went back and wrote, and then she would write a chapter, and then we would do another conversation, and then the transcription would turn into another chapter. And that's how the process worked. It was very, to use an appropriate term, organic. And so we just started to compile these chapters. And I think if we go ahead.
If you look at this, look how small the book is. I'm going to show you a slide later where I really encourage us all, myself included, to write as short as we possibly can. Jeanne was worried that the book was too short, and it also contains her poems, by the way, some of her poems. She worried that the book was too short, and Robert Ellsberg, the publisher, said, oh no, we love short, right? And I'm going to bring in some other folks who also say how much they love short. Did you have another thought, Tim, before we go on? I need to go for time, but I want to make sure you said everything you want to say.
No, that's pretty much it. Just that, why don't you show the proposal?
Maybe I would just say one more thing about Carole. Because I would never have thought about publishing. I had no idea how to go about publishing. And because of Carole's expertise and knowledge about publishing, she helped it to the publishing part. And so that was a very, very important piece.
Yeah, but I didn't see it coming either. And that's what's so fun about this. And I think it can give the people listening a lot of comfort that you really don't have to have the end in mind. you can start to gather ideas. I say it's like bread dough, you know. We did, though, have a book promotion plan that was part of her book proposal. I'm going to show you another book proposal later when I show you one from Sister Christine Schenk. She agreed to let me share a book proposal that I did with her. But notice that we put in here for the media piece, or who's going to talk about this book, relationships she had, the Boy Scouts of America, the Northeast Organic Farming Association of New York, the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. She was once in Global Sisters Report. We'll talk about them later. The Long Island Press. So you can start thinking about relationships that you have around the sisters that you work with, or some of the people in this audience may be sisters, but I think the majority are probably people who work for congregations, and start thinking about the relationships you already have with groups and organizations. I'm going to share the screen again now and go back to the slides for a minute, because what we want to do is show you the next one. One way out of this problem of sisters not wanting to have all the focus on themselves is to focus on a group. And this is what happened with Megan Rice. Tim and I went together to meet Sister Megan Rice when I lived with the RCJ. She was our neighbor. I didn't know who she was. And now I sort of laugh because everybody around me knew who she was, but I didn't, right? And we found out, I wanted to look up more about her. I thought she was a very interesting person as an anti-nuclear activist. And I found out this book on the left was happening about her. The book was, Liturgical Press was publishing it in their People of God series. And it said, Megan Rice, Witness to Peace. So I said, oh, Megan, I found your book. And she said, what book? And she didn't know about it. But the guy here, Dennis Codet, he was a big guy at National Catholic Reporter, fabulous person. I contacted him to find out where the book was because we couldn't get it. My library couldn't get it at Georgetown. And he said, oh, you know, I was working on that, but he had actually decided to step back. He had discerned that it wasn't something he wanted to do right then. And he agreed that he was going to recommend to the publisher that Megan and I take it over. Well, the big change that Megan wanted to make is she wanted Gregory Burgi Obed and Michael Wally, they all entered a nuclear facility together in 2012, July of 2012, and committed what is considered the largest breach in US nuclear security history when they prayed at a nuke, right? And they were originally convicted of sabotage and did prison time for a couple of years, but a Supreme Court shortlister overruled the Supreme Court shortlister who sent them to jail. And he said, no, you cannot commit sabotage with a loaf of bread and flowers. It is not possible to stop the national defense that way, and freed them all suddenly. And they came out to a lot of media attention. But here's what Megan and I worked on together that you may run into with the sisters you work with is stereotypes. We ran into the media, the news, writing about this stereotype of a cute nun who broke into a nuke. And, you know, I think Sister Jeanne's had some of this probably too from time to time, that, you know, you can be very serious about your interest in nuclear disarmament or your interest in the environment, and they can come along and say, oh, isn't she adorable? And it's very frustrating. We won't, I was going to tell a story about meeting with an editor from Liturgical Press, but in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and move on. Here's what we found in the coverage. They always were saying octogenarian, senior citizen. It wasn't so much an A team as an AARP team, one news group said. And actually, I laughed. I mean, it was kind of a funny line, but come on, guys. It's not about the age of the activist. That doesn't make it cute, right? It was still a very serious committed witness against nuclear weapons. And so to push back against this objectifying treatment, I was asked when Megan passed away, just before the book came out, she had seen it, she approved it all, but just before it came out, she slipped away from us. I was heartbroken. She was 92. I wanted to push back on this. And so this was a piece I did for Politico. And this is a very different take. And I feel like, I don't want to say I channeled her. There were people closer to Megan than me, but I feel like I could hear her saying nuclear weapons are social injustice. And to hop out of this for just a minute, because I pulled up some of these to show you, and I'll show you the Politico piece right here. Let me see. In the wee hours of July 28th, 2012, Sister Megan Rice and 2 other protesters snipped a chain link fence at the Y-12 nuclear weapons production complex in Tennessee, walking past broken security cameras and into history. I wanted to have this, I almost felt like I came out punching. It was like, no, come on, you know, they were tough. And then we talk about how nuclear weapons are, in her words, a theft from the poor. And this appeared in a postscript series that they have of people who passed away that year. And if you and I end up if you and I end up brainstorming together on the ones that you're working on, some of it we'll work on is that very thing. How do we sort of gently but insistently push back against the idea that sisters are cute, or that the work that they do is this? I want to get it into your mind, and you may already know this. One of the neat things about Communicators for Women Religious and Archivists for Women Religious is you are all communicators, right? So I'm not going to assume you don't know these things, but for our general knowledge base, I'll bring in the idea that we try to pitch it before anybody writes it. That is not what happened with Sister Jeanne. So this is not a 100% thing. She had put together her manuscript, and then we attached it as a full manuscript with a proposal. But for the most part, it is great to pitch because it's tempting to just write and send it out, but sometimes you risk writing for nobody. So think about a balance, a spiritual balance between going ahead and working with sisters to tell the story and write it down, just like we did with Sister Jeanne. We were praying together, we were walking together, and she was writing, and then we were reading together. Tim and Jeanne and I would take turns reading aloud, so we made sure it sounded, you know. And then, but pitches help us learn what types of editors might be open to frame new voices. You can also use pitches to send them around to a number of editors and just find out who's interested. I always tell them I'm doing that so they don't get surprised. I usually say something like, before I decide where to submit, I want to ask a couple of questions first. Here's a little pitch. Would you be willing to look at it and see if it might work for you? And also resisting the urge to polish it, and instead think about whether and how it channels a sister's specific voice or a group's voices. And here's what I say: rough and authentic is better than polished and hollow. There can be sometimes a temptation to make it sound more religious than it is. Feel free to go ahead. One of the most popular parts of Mother Teresa's work, I worked with the priest, Father Joe Langford, who was the founder of her congregation of priests. And Father Joe, you know, he said one of the most consoling parts of Mother Teresa's books is that she went through a dark night of the soul. That she actually had a time when she wasn't sure for a while there that she even believed anymore. And then, of course, you know, she did believe. It was a bigger story than that. But people were deeply consoled by that even Mother Teresa could struggle. So don't feel like you have to, you know, iron out any make it smooth or whatever. All books need a book proposal. I talk about a pitch for articles, but books need a whole proposal. And I'm going to show you a couple. I just showed you a piece of Sister Jeanne's, but I'm going to show you all of Chris Schenk's so you can see. We have a cover sheet. I love a great photo about the book, about the author, comparison titles, media engagement, a table of contents, a chapter outline, and a sample chapter. And again, and I don't charge money for this, but because it's on my personal mission, if anybody wants to work with me on these, I will be happy to work with you on them. And this is Chris Schenk, and I didn't know her actually when we first met. We were introduced by an editor at Sheet & Ward, Richard Brown, and he had been hired by Rowman and Littlefield, which is a secular publisher, but it owned Sheet & Ward at the time. He had been hired to bring back the Sheet & Ward brand. And I don't know how many of you know Sheet & Ward, but in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, there was nothing bigger. It was this Catholic publishing house that was really responsible for what's called the Catholic intellectual revival in this country, and it led to people like one of their authors was Fulton Sheen, who used to be on TV in the 50s. And some could say that it even led to the normalization of Catholicism, so that by the time John Kennedy was running for office, he was able to actually, you know, he got plenty of pushback for being Catholic. Now with Joe Biden being Catholic, the second Catholic president, it's not such a big deal, but it was a big deal back when Kennedy ran. So anyway, Richard sends Chris Schenk to me, and he was thinking that I'd work with her to find a different publisher. He had actually passed on this book. He'd said, no, it's not going to work for us. Version 1 of her proposal, and I'll show it to you right here, was well written. Chris couldn't do anything but write well, but it was very basic. She had a working title, said who she was, but didn't say what that meant, right? So we didn't really understand what she had contributed in the Catholic Church. She had a description of her book and a statement of importance. All of this is correct. But what was happening was Chris kind of, and these weren't really mistakes, but it was just not seeing the forest for the trees. She was used to being surrounded by people through her role as a founder of Future Church, being surrounded by people who knew who she was and what the context was of her social justice commitments and her commitment to a more equitable and balanced church. And so this kind of she thought it went without saying, well, for a guy like Richard, and Richard, I knew him when he was the head of Georgetown University Press, and he knows the church and publishing pretty well, but he didn't know this context. And she had also framed it as a life of Sister Kate Kunstler and the struggle for parish rights. Now, here's the makeover we gave it. If you like looking at makeovers in magazines, sometimes so do I. And this is the little makeover we gave it. Also, the word count was 130, and I told her it's going to be too long. We're going to try to get it down to 90. Sister Jeanne's book was 35,000 words, which is incredibly short. So if 35 to 50,000 words is short, and say 60 to 75 or 80,000 is medium, 90 to 120 is large, if you want to get a feel. We always do word counts. We don't do pages because word counts are consistent and pages aren't. So after this, here's what Chris and I cooked up together. We changed this just a little bit. We flipped Sister Kate Kunstler and we made it about the struggle for parish rights. Because Sister Kate Kunstler, I actually originally had a different title. I had the woman who won in Vatican Court about, because she now parishioners could actually get a vote and decide in the future of their parishes. This was in the wake of a lot of parish closings. But I also foregrounded Chris's media. So here we have PBS NewsHour, World News with Diane Sawyer. She didn't even talk about this on National Catholic Reporter. She's a columnist there, but she didn't list all this stuff. I said, come on, Chris, unpack it. We had to do the same thing with Sister Jeanne, was unpacking the relationships she had with the media. She had been, a Pax Christi Peacemaker of the Year for Long Island. There were some little pieces like that we put together. So we did this on page 1, and then about the book flips it just a little bit because we make it about the hundreds and thousands of ordinary Catholics whose persistence charted a new course in canon law. And she gave increased leverage to the laity and their parishes in the struggle to preserve their parish homes. And so, and then we, and I used a lot of the language actually from her original proposal. And now we still started that she was a nurse midwife to low-income families, because in her heart, that to her is one of the most important things that she's done and one of the things she cares about the most. But we put her as the founding director of Future Church and an award-winning columnist for NCR. This will feel boastful to a lot of sisters, and you're just going to have to walk slowly. Once in a while, you'll get a sister who's comfortable with this, but Chris wasn't. In fact, she was very prayerful about this because it felt a little forward to her. But what I said is, in this context, we're just talking to an editor right now. We just have to get the editor to say yes to the book. The book can actually be more modest. The book can be more thoughtful. The book can be more prayerful. But right now, we have to give him reasons why this book is going to work. And Robert Ellsberg said that too when we all talked to him. He said, thank you for putting a good media section in there. And I'll show you the media because these were after the comparison titles. I'll show you the media section, media and book promotion, because he said a lot of people say they're going to get media, but you guys actually wrote it down and showed us how it was going to work. We try to make commitments that we're going to reach out to certain publications. And she's given a lot of talks. So it's Sister Jeanne, we want to know that this person, either they're going to be comfortable doing this, or if they're not, go ahead and say that. But then, by all means, have a plan for how the book will get out there anyway. Not all books have to be pushed. In fact, some books are specifically successful because they're not pushed. We've had books from contemplatives that took off simply because they did what they did in the hearts of the readers, right? So I don't want you to think, I don't even want to be taken as someone who feels like we have to flack the church, you know, we really kind of don't, but she had those conversations going on and they made them forward. The punchline is, I showed it to Richard again. I was so grateful to him for introducing us. I showed it to him again and he goes, wait a minute, I didn't actually know some of this stuff. I want to publish this book. And the book is coming out in the fall and they've been working together very happily. Also, Jeanne Ward has been purchased. Bloomsbury bought it just this past week. So it now has a new owner. Bloomsbury already owned Jeanne Ward's London office. I think it's going to be a good owner for Jeanne Ward, but it also, Bloomsbury has a little more of an international footprint than Rowman and Littlefield did. I like Rowman, but Bloomsbury's bigger. And so I think this is going to be the right frame for her book. I put a note here about Flaherty and the human face. One of the things we did with the story about the parishes is we put a human face on it. Here's a book to think about reading. It's called The Elements of Story. And Frances Flaherty was an editor at the New York Times when writing this book, and the editor specifically of the long form journalism in the New York Times. And so this is a book about how to work with narratives to make them a little more broadly, kind of have that broad appeal. And in chapter 1, it's just so heartwarming. It says, part 1, a human face. Every story, even the driest, has a human face. Draw it well and put it on display. For readers, it is a mirror and a magnet. You know, and so getting that sense that readers were more interested in how parishioners fought for their beloved parishes than they were really even necessarily about the sister who led that. One thing we did also is create a Wikipedia page. Now, they mentioned in the materials for this talk that I have a project going on Wikipedia. I won't have time to go into it in depth, but here's an article you can read, Why Notable Catholic Sisters Need Wikipedia Pages and How to Create Them. I made one for Chris, and I pulled it up and now it seems to be missing, but trust me, Chris has a Wikipedia page. You can look it up, Christine Schenk. I was horrified and scandalized that not only did she not have a page, but Ilia Delio didn't have one. My beloved late former editor, Father Drew Christensen, didn't have one. So I got into the business of making Wikipedia pages in all my spare time, right? And it's been really, really gratifying. So thinking with your congregation about whether or not, mostly sisters from the past, but some contemporary sisters might need pages. I thought it would just also help make the case that she should be the author of this book. Let's see. And for the archivists in the audience, because I know that we do have some archivists present, that can be a great thing for archivists to do, is identify women from history or more recently who you think need pages. You can look on a group called Women in Red, and I can give you the link for that if you write to me separately. I'd love to help you do that. Women in Red is a Wikipedia-led project. 80% of the biographies on Wikipedia are of men and only 15% of the editors are women. So it's a attempt to straighten that out. And I'll work with you. Also, you can get great photos. The archivist can work with the congregation to agree that we can put a Creative Commons 4.0 license on it. That's what Wikipedia requires, and get these stories told. There's Richard at Jeanne Ward. Hi, Richard. Also, co-founder Maisie Ward. I'm writing an article about Maisie Ward right now. I just love the Jeanne Ward story, but she was a third order Dominican, and it was a husband and wife team who were the original founders of Jeanne Ward. These are some of Carole's favorite tips to keep in mind. I already shared one with you, and that is write short. You know, almost everything could be shorter. Editors are going to love you if you write short. If they give you a word range, come in at the bottom of it. Consider blog posts, the Wikipedia writing, although that requires training. So please talk to me if you want to train up on that. I would be completely honored to help you get, if you just dive in on your own, you might get smacked around by some of their angry rogue editors, and that's no fun. So come talk to me. Don't just contribute to your own congregation's material, but consider adding to other groups, priests, other congregations of sister. They're all hungry for content. Invade the old boys, right? Well, one woman came to me, this was in a secular context, but she said, I don't want to publish in Journal X because it's a boys club. And I said, well, but it's also one of the top ones in the world. Why don't you talk to them? And it turns out they knew they were a boys club. They really wanted more women's voices, and they worked with her on it. And she published a huge piece there. Consider the mainstream press. A priest came to me years ago. He was sad that he didn't get into America. He was one of our Jesuits. And I said, they have too many priests. Let's go to the New York Times. And he got his piece there instead. I'm not authorized to say who or what the piece was, but but it was a fun story. Here's my sweet spot. And those of you who are professional communicators, this isn't a big surprise to you, but I like to share this just for us all to think together. Local media is great, but it can sometimes be a little small. National and global, good luck. Once in a while they'll bite. Megan had national press, but that was, she had to go to prison to get it. The regional media to me is the sweet spot, though. It's just so much easier to interest them in stories. And now, to close out, because we've got about 4 more minutes, I want to share some advice from publishers. This is advice that I asked a couple of publishers that I like, and I said, hey, I'm talking to you, the Communicators and Archivists for Women Religious. Have you got any thoughts? And yes, they did. Global Sisters Report. This is Gail DeGeorge of Global Sisters Report. And before I show you what she had to say, oops, go back a little bit. Before I show you what she had to say, here's the pieces that I've done for Global Sisters Report, only 4 of them. The first was a Q&A with Mother Ann Francis at Visitation, because she's their first African superior. That's where I go to Mass. And I just learn, one of the fun things is learning to see the stories around you. You're probably surrounded by stories all the time. Another was Q&A with Sister Jeanne. We disclosed to the readers that we knew each other and worked on the book, but they said I could do this Q&A with her about nonviolent resistance and also her beautiful farm. Then this one I was asked to do about a Zoom webinar connecting Mexico City and Nairobi, Kenya, and then that. And so the one about Wikipedia. So here we go back to Gail, who said, please stress the little things like giving us enough notice about events. She said, it's a basic, but we still get emails 2 days before an event. We need preferably a month of notice. She said they can actually work with 2 weeks, but she'd love a month. Communication, we try to respond individually, but can't always. Email us again. Carole will say nudge, 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 gently but consistently. These people are overwhelmed and they rarely have enough staff and enough hours in the day. Reflect sister values. She said that's more vague, but we're sometimes surprised at the language used in press releases. And that's where I said, we don't need to get too slick here. Feel free to be rough and honest and real and reflect it so it sounds like the sisters, not like, it was written by a marketing team. And I'm the first one that needs to be lectured to about that, because sometimes I can be too fancy by half and I need to slow down, get prayerful, and remember that, it's about the sister and her message. And that's a picture of Mother Ann Francis Naganga. She was my very first interview. And it was really, that was on the day she was installed as Visitation Superior. And then this is, oops, we're just about out of time, so I'm going to wrap it up quickly. But Joellen Cicerelli is the president and publisher of Loyola Press. And Joellen used to work with Mr. Rogers. She's a really cool person. Just read her bio. I think you'll love her. She has a fascinating background, and it was just perfect for what she does for Loyola. She said, we love our women religious authors. They consistently provide some of our finest works. Our readers enjoy daily or weekly devotionals tied to a theme with brief reflections, scripture or prayer, followed by reflection questions. Those submissions always get a careful look. Never title your work until the end. I don't know, but I agree with her. You need to hold it as a working title, and don't get too attached to a title or cover idea. They actually consider that part of marketing, and they'll think with you on it. We went through a lot with the cover for Sister Jeanne's book. She also said, understand you're writing for lay people of minimum to moderate theological and teaching background, the quality of the manuscript, timing, opportunity, and prayer. She, they all emphasize prayer. Everybody here was about how this is a discernment process. And she said, begin with an audience and purpose in mind. And I'd say really with Sister Jeanne, we kind of did it the other way, but I think these two visions can meet in the middle. And then this is from Gary Jansen. And I haven't yet sold a book to him, but I've sent him a few, and I keep thinking we'll get a book over the line with him. He said the same thing. Remember this about Sister Jeanne's books. He said, I love short books, especially when it comes to spirituality. 30 to 40K is a great sweet spot. Most people's attention spans have been depleted. And he says, I'd love to see more women religious being published. He surprised me. He said 90% of all submissions come from lay people. I didn't know that. And then he talks about, what do I want? Do I want to inform, teach, or entertain? Again, our experience was kind of different with Sister Jeanne, but this is how he also sees it from the perspective of he might get 10 or 12 of these in a week, and maybe only one will go forward. And so he thinks about what to consider. We get a lot of book submissions that would make good articles, but not great books. Some books shouldn't be articles. So thinking about what it should ultimately be. And by the way, I have no obsession with books. I am just as honored to write a blog post for a place like Loyola. I just want to communicate spiritually. And then he continues that he and Vanita Wright and Eric Clayton did a webinar with the Jesuit Media Lab called We Want to Write a Spirituality Book. So here I've linked to it so you guys can see it. Let's see. It's right here. I was going to play a minute of it, but I think we're running out of time, so I'm actually just going to keep going through. But you can see it there on, at the Jesuit Media Lab YouTube channel. And let's see, where's the thing? Oh, thought for a minute I lost my whole slideshow, but I didn't. So that was Gary. Now, how to work with me on Publishing for Sisters, and this is our very last slide. You can use this link at any time you wish. I'll put it in the chat if I can do it. And this is my Calendly, and this link will allow you, I'm going to actually show you what it looks like. It'll take you to a page like this. So you pick a date and then you pick a time. It shows you what my open times are that day. Some days I have more time than others, but it'll let you pick time. And so in the chat, I just put a link to it. There we go. And then I want you to be thinking about your questions. I have a couple of questions that were asked on the little questionnaire sheet that I put around, that I sent around, and then I'll let you ask your questions. You can ask me to think and pray with you on anything. I'm here for conceiving projects. I'm here for crafting pitches for articles, writing book proposals, developing manuscripts, reaching out to the regional media. A lot of you are professionals at this, so I don't assume you need me. But some people might also just want another person to bounce it off of. Remember, Catholic Sisters will be my priority for the next decade, so you will not be wasting my time, and you don't have to worry about paying. And with that, that's it. And now I think I went just a couple minutes over, but we have time for some questions. Do you want me to share the questions that were asked from the questionnaire? There were two people who spoke or who asked questions, or do we have some already queued up in the Q&A?
We do have one in the Q&A, so why don't we answer that, and then we can move into the other questions if no more pop up.
Great.
So Dusty asked, the most recent book that was published by our congregation was self-published. Thoughts on doing that? Do you recommend getting ISBNs for self-published books that are primarily for an internal audience?
Well, I'm kind of torn on that because I worked with the RSCJ on a book and they also chose to self-publish it, and it was fine. They did have an ISBN number for it, though. I believe they went ahead and put it in the big pipeline. All publishing started out as self-publishing, so I have no bias against it. It used to be in the 1800s or 1700s, that's what you had to do. You hired the printer, you paid them, you found the money, you sold the books. Yeah, there were booksellers, but it was a very different world. So I have no bias against it. That said, I almost never recommend it because I have yet to see the self-published book that took off. And we can talk about alternatives to self-publishing. And what we could also think about with that book is if you want to do, if you want to have a meeting with me, we could talk about trying to also consider reframing it and trying again to find a publisher. Self-publishing does not usually cut off that a publisher could step in later, especially if the book is maybe, just like we did with Christiane, framed a little differently, right? She had the great material. She had to live the life, right? I didn't do any of that. It was just a matter of emphasis and where we put the thing. So I'd love to see the book and think with you. I wish I could say that people, now there is a press called Wipf and Stock, and I think they have a fabulous niche, because those were two editors who, Wipf and Stock, are both, they came from Catholic publishing world, and they realized that a lot of books were being turned down because of financial problems. And they said, we want to use print on demand technology and be able to put books into print because we like them. He said they still need to be quality books, but we won't make a decision based on money. And all of these other presses, Orbis, Loyola, Paulist, you name it, Ave Maria, they have to make decisions based on money for the most part. You know, that's, they got to keep the lights on and they have to keep people employed. Wipf and Stock moves a little more lightly. So we can also talk about approaching them. And any other questions from the Q&A? Otherwise, I'll go to the, let's see, copyright goes to the sister who wrote it. Oh yeah, always keep your copyrights. And if please come to me for contract negotiation. I'd love to negotiate contracts, not scared of them at all. Keep your copyrights for books. I even try to keep them for articles, and I'm doing some blog writing now for a publisher, and I want to make sure that I'm keeping my copyright there. A lot of times they'll ask you for it because it's easier for them if they have it, but I don't care. It's our intellectual property. Hang on to it. And I can talk to you about extremely diplomatic ways to ask for and get copyright, and even to get it back. If for some reason you signed it off in the past, we can sometimes get it back. Now, the questions that I was asked in the forums, one person said, I'm finishing a book on, I won't name it exactly, I'll just say a spiritual topic, and I'm beginning to look for publishers. In the book, I critique the patriarchal church of the past, but also point out good things that were happening in the same period. I'm a bit hesitant to look to Catholic publishing houses because of the fear that they would hesitate and not want to offend church officials. What is your advice? That's where the book proposal becomes so fantastic. You create a proposal and you share it around before you decide where to publish, and you get some feedback. Now, if we had been turned down by Orbis, hallelujah, we weren't, but I don't expect anything. We could have gone to others, and I like to try to have these preliminary conversations before we move it forward to a big submission. Most Catholic publishers are fine with critiquing the church, but most Catholic publishers will not defy the church. So they'll say it's fine to push back, it's fine, you know, within the reasonable bounds of healthy discourse, right? But most of them, even Sheed and Ward, who were so Catholic, were willing to, you know, mix it up a little with Rome. But what they wouldn't do is defy Rome. So when they were offered a book one time, it was a book that Maisie Ward wanted very much, but the priest had actually broken with Rome, and she said no. And it broke her heart. She really wanted to do that book, but not if they were going to have an actual split. So think about the degree to which this is one versus the other. The second question from that, oops, not one. The second question from that document says, it's going to load its response because why? Because we're zooming. And maybe it was number 2. Oh, here we go. Somebody had a book about sisters who visited someone in jail, women in jail, and had written to them. And could these letters now become a book? Absolutely. Narratives about incarceration, narratives, especially when it's incarceration for conscience, very, very compelling. I would love to talk to those people about that. And I have a little soft spot for it because I think that our world is committing such atrocities, from genocide to nuclear annihilation, that, you know, there are many, many very righteous reasons that people agree to become incarcerated to make a point. And could I ask the other parts of the copyright question? Okay, that was me reading too fast. Can I see the rest of the copyright question? Well, here we go. Copyright goes to the sister who wrote it. Rights go to the publisher. Most profits to the sister would likely go to the congregation. What happens to the profits when a sister is deceased? Would they go directly to the congregation? Does the congregation have any publication rights? To my knowledge, and maybe I'll go back to Sister Jeanne on this, because to my knowledge, the congregation, some of them are even copyright by the congregation. It depends on the sister. Some will put it in her name, some will put it in the congregation's name. I would just never put it in the publisher's name. What if Sister Jeanne can, we put it in your name, I do know.
All the proceeds go to the my congregation.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
sell a book, yeah.
Yeah.
But my congregation they would receive that, and then they transferred it to the ministry that I was involved in, Homecoming Farm.
Yeah. And here's another tricky one, because I did this book about, Sister Megan, and she and Michael and Greg went to jail. And I said, that is not right that they go to prison and I get a book deal. And so all of my proceeds, because I got paid for this book and I earned royalties, I sent them at their request to the Dorothy Day Catholic Worker, where Michael Wally lives, and to the Duluth Catholic Worker, where Greg Bergie Obed lives. And Greg said, but Carole, it's okay for you to earn money. You're doing the work of writing the book. I said, yeah, but not when you guys were incarcerated. That just didn't feel right to me. So it's always kind of tricky. Any other questions or last thoughts? Also, I want to say Sister Jeanne would publish her first book when she was celebrating her 85th birthday. And so you're going to be working with some sisters who want to say, oh, my day came and went. It's too late. I'm like, no, it's not. We can do this. Yeah, we can do this and then some. Any other questions? And be thinking, definitely reach out to me. I love, to coach on the Wikipedia or stuff like that. That's a lot of fun.
All right, so I'm not seeing any more come in, so I think this seems like a good natural closing point to close up. I want to say thank you to Carole, Tim, and Sister Jeanne. This was very informative and wonderful. And again, to all the attendees, thank you for joining us today. The recording and resources in a survey will be emailed out after the webinar. And as Carole has said, you can always reach out to her with questions, situations, anything when it relates to publishing and Catholic Sisters. And then I also just wanted to give a short plug for the Communicators for Women Religious annual conference is coming up October 8th to 11th in Chicago. And the early bird pricing for that will end on July 15th, which will be coming up faster than we think. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to ACWR for joint hosting this with us. And I hope that you all have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.